In this video, we'll talk about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and our focus is on Volume 2, Chapters 4 through 8, which is Frankenstein's creatures inset story of what he went through from his birth or creation to the present moment when he's confronting Victor. So the creature ends up being forced into hiding because he's been attacked and chased out of a town. He's now forced to live almost like an animal in a pigsty, hiding himself because of his appearance. And the only contact he has with any sort of human society is by spying on the DeLacy family through a small gap in the wall between the outside pigsty where he's forced to hide and then the inside of the cabin where this family lives. So chapters 4 through 8 revolve around the DeLacy family and how the creature interacts or indirectly interacts with the family as he sort of spies on them, and they're unaware that this creature is sort of in the adjoining pigsty attached to their house. So the creature longs to join the DeLacy family, and he wants that community, that affection, that love that only a family can give to a child. But the creature can't fully join or freely join in with human society or family because of the way he looks. So this idea of prejudice is still a central theme in the creature's story. So we learn a little bit of information about the DeLacy family and their backstory. From first appearances, there's the father, Father DeLacy, who's blind, and that's like a key thing because his blindness makes him sort of maybe more empathetic to the creature because he can't fully judge the monster based on a surface appearance. They're very poor family. And they are struggling with sustaining themselves in this sort of poor existence. The creature starts helping them in small ways. He wants to bring them joy and happiness, so he'll fetch like firewood or do sort of favors that help them out. So he wants to join and he wants to help them. Because it does seem like they're unhappy or they're struggling, and we learn a little bit more about why they're sad. The creature starts learning slowly language from the family. So he learns names or words like fire, milk, bread, wood. He learns that the young girl's name is Agatha. She's the sister. And he learns that the young man's name is Felix, and he's the brother or son of the father or the old blind man. So he learns that this is a family, and eventually we get the backstory that the DeLacy family has been sort of shunned or exiled from their community, and they are fleeing from being persecuted. And Felix is in love with a woman named Sapphy, and he's longing for her. So that's creating some of the sadness in their family. So the backstory of the DeLacys is basically that Felix is in love with a woman named Sapphy, and her father caused the arrest of old Father DeLacy and his sister. They lost their fortune and they had to be forced to exile from their homeland. So Safdie's father kind of betrayed them, and he ruined their family's wealth and their standing in society. So the story kind of reiterates themes related to humanity's cruelty and violence and prejudice against anybody who is an outsider. So Felix he's like longing to reunite with a woman named, this girl named Safdie, who he wants to marry, but it's her father who sort of ruined their union, their marriage. So the creature learns a lot of lessons and about himself, questions his own existence for the first time while he's observing the family in the cottage. It's at this first time that he recognizes his own disfigurement, his own state of ugliness, basically. On page 139, he says, "I had admired the perfect forms of my cottagers, their grace, beauty, and delicate complexions. But how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool?" So he sees himself, his reflection in a pool of water. "At first I started back, unable to believe what it was indeed I who was reflected in the mirror. And when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and mortification. Alas, I did not yet entirely know the fatal effects of this miserable deformity." So he's realizing for the first time that, his appearance is deformed, is, monstrous in appearance, and it terrifies himself even to view himself. And so this is his sort of first realization that he's different from others, and that human society is rejecting him because of his appearance. But he learns to, do favorable things for the family without, appearing to them in his full appearance. So he hides himself, hides his appearance, only comes out at night, and does, favors for the family. So they refer to him as a good spirit, as wonderful, and they don't know how these, miracles are happening, or how these, how they're getting wood for the fire, who's chopping down the wood, or who's collecting wood. But it's the creature that's doing all these good deeds. So it shows that he was a benevolent creature from the start, that he was kind, and it's just his appearance that makes him monstrous. So in chapter 5, Felix is reunited with Safdie, the woman that he loves, and she comes to live with them in the cottage. She is referred to as Arabian. She doesn't speak English, so they start teaching her English, and it's at the same time that the creature is learning English, or learning the language of the cottagers. So he's learning how to master language and communication, and it turns out he can gain this quite fast. So he learns or he does learn more quickly than Safie how to speak the language and how to communicate, and he learns how to read and write. He learns about all sorts of parts of human history. So they start teaching Safie, and all the while the creature is observing these lessons that they're going through about history, world history. So he learns all sorts of things about suffering, cruelty, violence of human history. So this is page 144. He says, through this work, I obtained a cursory knowledge of history and a view of the several empires at present existing in the world. It gave me an insight into the manners, governments, and religions of the different nations of the earth. I heard of the slothful Asiatics, of the stupendous genius and mental activity of the Grecians, of the wars and wonderful virtue of the early Romans, of their subsequent degeneration, of the decline of the mighty empire, of chivalry, Christianity, and kings. I heard of the discovery of the American hemisphere and wept with Sapphi over the hapless fate of its original inhabitants. So he's talking about the suffering of indigenous peoples with colonialism. So there's a lot of examples there of, like, you know, empires falling, wars, all sorts of sort of tragedies, historic tragedies, and he empathizes with those who are victims of colonialism or of war. And it makes him contemplate what humanity is. He says, was man indeed at once so powerful, so virtuous and magnificent, yet so vicious and base? So he sees these two sides of human nature at once, you know, powerful, virtuous, magnificent, but then also violent, vicious, evil, base. So they're degraded and harm others. So there's these two sides of human nature that he's recognizing. And he's also viewing it himself as he's experienced human society as being prejudiced and violent against him. That same chapter, chapter 5, he's also learning about the division of wealth and class systems. He says the division of property of immense wealth and squalid poverty. So he recognizes himself as, you know, having no possessions, no money, no friends, no kind of property. So he's very abject poverty, abject, base, a degraded existence, basically. So this is page 145. The words induced me to turn towards myself. I learned that the possessions most esteemed by your fellow creatures were high and unsullied descent united with riches. A man might be respected with only one of these acquisitions, but without either he was considered, except in very rare instances, as a vagabond and a slave, doomed to waste his powers for the profit of the chosen few. And what was I? Of my creation and creator I was absolutely ignorant. But I knew that I possessed no money, no friends, no kind of property. I was, besides, endowed with a figure hideously deformed and loathsome. I was not even of the same nature as man. I was more agile than they, and could subsist upon coarser diet. I bore the extremes of heat and cold with a less injury to my frame. My stature far exceeded theirs. When I looked around, I saw and heard of none like me. Was I then a monster, a blot upon the earth from which all men fled and whom all men disowned? So he's really recognizing his sense of difference, his otherness against humanity, you know, and his lowly, degraded position in the social system. He also learns about the difference between sexes and reproduction, and this will become important as the story goes on, because he longs for companionship, and will learn a companion, somebody who accepts him. In chapter 7, he goes into a couple of different, there's books that he reads, or that the family discuss. And the one that stands out, it's an allusion to Paradise Lost. So Paradise Lost was written by Milton, and it is sort of the story, kind of a biblical story of the lost Garden of Eden, and depicts the war between God and Satan. But he acknowledges his similarity or the parallels between him and Adam as God's son or God's creation, but he also relates himself, his existence, to Satan and as a sort of fallen angel or a figure of sin. And this is on page 154 of my text. He says, it moved every feeling of wonder and awe that the picture of an omnipotent God warring with his creatures was capable of exciting. I often referred the several situations as their similarity struck me to my own. Like Adam, I was created apparently, united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God, a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his creator. So this is unlike the creature, where he was spawned from Victor, who was a flawed man who, was driven by ambition and pride and didn't take care of his creation. So he immediately abandoned him. So it's a different situation here. And the creature goes on, he was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of a superior nature, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, for often like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. So he views, or he acknowledges, or relates himself to Satan as being envious of others. He wants what others have, and that's his motivating factor. So it's sort of his sin or his flaw that he has is envy. So where Victor's maybe sin is pride, the creature's sin is having envy of others. Eventually, he actually discovers that he has Victor's journal in his possession that he carried with him, and he had taken from the cloak that he wore when he left Victor's apartment, and he starts studying them. So the journals that Victor has made, that Victor composed in the months leading up to the creation of the creature. And then he curses Victor for creating him as a figure who was hideous. So he basically views Victor as the source of his suffering. This is page 155. He says, "Cursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God in pity made man beautiful and alluring after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid from its very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and detested." So he really resents the fact that Victor created him as something that other people shun and discuss or reject. And it's a form that's similar to humans, but not quite human. So he doesn't fit in any human society. The allusion to Adam and Eve is also, or the Garden of Eden continues on page 156, where he says, "No Eve soothed my sorrows or shared my thoughts. I was alone. I remembered Adam's supplication to his creator, but where was mine? He had abandoned me, and in the bitterness of my heart, I cursed him." So he, again, the buildup of antagonism and resentment and hatred for Victor as his creator comes out through the creature's acknowledgement that he is an outcast, that he is rejected, that he is ugly. So it's this building anger that we see in the creature, when he recognizes his own exclusion from society. So in essence, we are seeing the gradual transformation of the creature from a being that was innocent and benevolent, kind, good, to a creature that acknowledges its difference, that acknowledges its role or place of as an outsider or outcast in society. And this is what turns it to malevolence, to evil, to those sins of existence, to be violent and vengeful. So this is the first step of acknowledgement that the creature recognizes its own identity as monstrous. So it recognizes itself as a monster. And the allusion to Adam and God and Satan and God, or Satan and Adam as two polar oppositions, gives us that insight into the creature's sense of self. So in chapter 7, the creature tries to befriend the blind old man in the cottage. You know, he longs for family, for acceptance, so he sees his best chance as talking with the old man who's blind, who can't judge him based on the superficial appearance. And he hopes that if he introduces himself to the old man and befriends him, then eventually he'll be accepted into this family. But it doesn't turn out that way. So while he's talking with the old man, Felix comes home, and the Safdie and Agatha also enter. They scream and faint, and then immediately Felix attacks him because he just sees this horrible looking person talking with his father. So Felix, he says, dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. I could have torn him limb from limb as the lion rends the antelope, but my heart sunk within me as with bitter sickness, and I refrained. I saw him at the point of repeating his blows when, overcome by pain and anguish, I quitted the cottage and in the general tumult escaped unperceived to my hovel. So he's ultimately rejected by the family that he has grown to love, and he longed to be accepted by, but he got attacked and rejected and beaten. So again, this is another crucial moment in his transformation from being innocent to malevolent and evil. So in being rejected by the de Lacy family, the creature becomes angry, rageful, and seeks revenge, and is basically just, determined or wanting to create havoc and destruction to all that is around him, because he's full of sadness and despair of being rejected, but he's gonna act out in violent, vengeful ways because of that despair. So he basically acts out. He says, I, like the archfiend, bore a hell within me, and finding myself unsympathized with, wished to tear up the trees, spread havoc and destruction around me, and then to have sat down and enjoyed the ruin. So this is what he felt he could have done. Eventually he tries to sort of calm himself down and go back to the de Lacy family, as a sort of, perhaps he went about it the wrong ways, but he found that they had completely abandoned the cabin and left. So he feels abandoned for the second time. And at that moment he feels, pure hatred, desolation, despair, And he really blames Victor as the source of all of his suffering. This is on page 164. He says, "Unfeeling, heartless creator, you had endowed me with perceptions and passions, and then cast me abroad, an object for the scorn and horror of mankind. But on you only had I any claim for pity and redress, and from you I determined to seek that justice which I vainly attempted to gain from any other being that wore the human form." So basically, he wants to go back and find Victor, because he feels like of all humans, Victor's the only one who owes him anything, who could actually give him some sort of pity or empathy, because he is Victor's creation. So while he was rejected by the DeLacy family, he still has some moments of kindness within him still, so he's not fully evil yet. On his way through the forest, he sees a child who slips and is drowning in the river, and he goes to help this little girl. And then his reaction when he brings her to shore, so he basically saves this child, he's met with being shot at. So he saves a young girl from drowning and ends up getting shot instead of celebrated for his kindness and benevolence. So again, he's met with human cruelty when he does something nice for them. And he eventually vows eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind. So he recognizes that humanity shuns him and excludes him, so he's going to be essentially villainous back to humanity, because that's how they treat him. It's sort of an eye for an eye kind of arrangement here he sees. So and then the creature sort of ends his story by relaying the experience of what he did when he killed Frankenstein's youngest brother, William, and then framed Justine Moritz. So he was seized, he says, with anger when he sees that young William was a relative of Frankenstein. So when he heads to Geneva, he meets the young boy, and he thinks at first that, oh, if I could befriend this young boy, I could teach him to be my friend. And as a child, he wouldn't have the same prejudices as the rest of humanity. But even the young child, William, rejects him. He calls him a monster, an ugly wretch, and an ogre, and rejects the creature's, friendship or attempt to befriend him. And he realizes that the monster then grasps the child's throat and kills him when he recognizes that this is Victor's youngest brother. So it's his first murder, and this is his sort of completion as an antagonist and villain in the story, by killing the child. So it's really a symbolic moment of killing the innocent child that he once was. So William sort of symbolizes that innocence that the creature once embodied himself. And then he also just, decides to work mischief and frames Justine Moritz, who was also innocent, with the crime of William's death by planting the portrait of Victor's mother in her dress when she was sleeping in a nearby barn. So that's how he sort of became this monstrous, villainous person. So he's telling this story to Victor, and this is sort of his full transformation from being kind, innocent, childlike to being evil, monstrous Satan, like a Satan-like figure who is vengeful, envious, and full of despair.